Hey, it's Beanie. So over the past couple of weeks, I was working on a watercolor project and I thought it would be fun to document my process so that I could show you what I came up with. Back when I was in high school, I took a lot of art classes and I learned the basics of how to watercolor, but I graduated 5 years ago and I've hardly done any art since then. There was one project I did a few Christmases back. I made some watercolor bookmarks that were all Harry Potter themed. I'll try and throw pictures up on the screen of how those turned out, but I gave them out to my family members at Christmas time. So this time I wanted each bookmark to be themed after a different book, and I wanted to make a set of 6. So these are my books that I wanted to make bookmarks for. First, I have The Well of Ascension. Next is Mr. Gum. These are my favorite book series growing up as a kid. Then next I have Gutter Child. I have not yet read this one, but I picked it up recently and it looks very good. Then I have Malibu Rising, which I'm currently reading. And then I have Remarkably Bright Creatures. This one I recently finished and it was really good. And there is also one more book that I wanted to make a bookmark for. It's for a book called Shady Hollow, and I don't have it with me because my brother has that book, but I do plan to borrow it from him at some point because it looks really cute. So now let me just jump into the footage of how I made my bookmarks. And just a side note, in some of the clips, I am wearing a wrist brace on either one or both of my arms. It's because I was dealing with some carpal tunnel the past couple weeks, but I'm all healed up now, so if you see that, just please ignore it. Okay, let's jump right in. So first I measured out the bookmarks on my watercolor paper and then went ahead and cut them out. And once that was done, I was ready to go ahead and start with my sketches. So starting with the octopus bookmark, I had the idea just to draw in an octopus in the foreground and then fill in the background with some coral reefs and then some plants that I found from pictures online. And then I checked my book for some quotes that I thought would be nice to add onto the other side of the bookmark. And I decided just to fill in the bottom half with some seaweed, and then a trick I do for lettering is to draw in some lines with a ruler and then mark those letters in between the lines, and I do find it easiest when I'm doing all caps that turns out the neatest, so that's what I went with. And I tried adding in those seashells at first, but I'm very bad at drawing seashells, so I decided just to add in a tentacle and then leave it pretty simple. And whenever I'm doing a watercolor project, I like to start off with my pencil sketch and then define the lines afterwards with a fine liner like this one that I'm using here. And then if I want to afterwards, then I'll go back and erase those pencil lines from underneath. And like I said before, I was drawing in some of these plants from pictures that I found online, but tell me why this one literally looks like a piece of broccoli, like what the heck. But anyway, I just finished up the details and then this sketch was all done. So next was the bookmark for this book, Gutter Child, and this is a book that I have not yet read, so it's a bit tricky to come up with a design to draw, but I really liked the fence design that was on the cover of this book, so I thought I would just go ahead and replicate that. It's a little bit cheating because I'm just copying the same design, but I do think it'll be really cool and pretty to have a bookmark that exactly matches the book. And since I haven't read the book, I had to find a quote online, and this one says, "Lately I've started to write things of my own, unfinished thoughts about all the things I don't understand and the things I don't want to forget, including the story Ida told me about the way things began." Very mysterious, and I'm excited to learn what it means when I read the book. Then next up was the second bookmark for a book that I have not read, so this is the one for Shady Hollow, and I know that it's kind of a murder mystery, but all of the characters are animals, so I googled what some of the characters were, like their name and their species, and I thought it would be funny if I just sketched in some animals that were having mugshots taken, so then you get some of their names, and then I just kind of gave some of them some clothing items that I thought would be kind of funny and add some character. So I believe the main character of these books is the fox shown in the middle there. Her name is Vera Vixen, and I wanted her to stand out, so I did not give her a nameplate, but I did go back in later and give her a little name tag so that her name could still be included in the drawing. Next up was the bookmark for my Mr. Gum books. So this book series was my absolute favorite as a kid. I really loved all the characters, and the art style throughout the book is really unique and interesting. So I just kind of wanted to keep it simple and sketch in some of the characters that I remember from the book. So we have Mr. Gum himself, this dog, and then there's this character who's an evil fairy who kind of lives in Mr. Gum's garden and harasses him with a frying pan. And Mr. Gum's pose here, he was holding some intestines, and I did not want to draw them in, but his hand was looking weird without them, so I had to add those back. Then for the backside, the quote I chose is just the opening lines of the very first book, so it says, Mr. Gum was a fierce old man with a red beard and two bloodshot eyes that stared out at you like an octopus curled up in a bad cave. He was a complete horror who hated children, animals, fun, and corn on the cob. What he liked was snoozing in bed all day, being lonely, and scowling at things. He slept and scowled and picked his nose. Now, I will admit that the actual quote in the book says that he picked his nose and ate it, but that was just a little bit too gross, so I did not include that last part. And my fine liner was running out of ink, but I promise I went back and filled in the rest of those letters later. Next up was my sketch for my Mistborn book. This was for the second book called Well of Ascension, where there's kind of this magical cave and well situation that kind of happens at the end of the book. I won't do any spoilers, but I kind of just wanted to do a general kind of fantasy theme for this book, nothing too specific to the actual plot, but I decided for one side to kind of do this cabinet that has these potion bottles and then just kind of a book that has one of the quotes from the book hidden inside. And then on the other side, I wanted to do a magical cave with what I imagined the Well of Ascension to look like. Now, the final bookmark was for my book Malibu Rising. So in this book, there's a family that lives in Malibu and they have a house right on the beach, and they talk about how they can look out the window and have a view of the ocean. So I wanted to sketch in this little window and then show the ocean through and then put the quote from the book about the water underneath. And I do want to point out that I didn't come up with the design of this window. I was just copying off of a reference photo. And since the family in the book are really into surfing, I thought for the other side I would sketch in a silhouette of a surfer surfing on a big gnarly wave. And these are the sketches of the final bookmark. Then, with all of the sketches complete, it was finally time for me to start painting. So this is my set of watercolors. I don't know anything about this brand, but I got this set from Christmas one year, and I think they work just fine. And since I wanted to paint the bookmark for the Gutter Child book first, I started to pick out some watercolors that I thought were gonna match that cover the best. But then, as I was packing away my tin, disaster struck. No! And I ended up knocking over my cup of water that was here on my desk, and the water went absolutely everywhere. My Gutter Child book did unfortunately get some water damage from that, and also some water had splashed onto my bookmarks, and I noticed that wherever the water had touched, my ink had bled, which means that the fine liner I used to trace out all of my designs was not, in fact, waterproof, and that means that I can't watercolor my bookmarks without the ink just bleeding everywhere and making a huge mess. In order to preserve these bookmarks and not have to start all the way at the beginning, I thought I would try to wash out this non-waterproof ink and then go back over my designs later with another pen that is waterproof. And you can see here from this clip that this was working pretty well. A lot of the ink was immediately lifting off of the paper. You can kind of see that it's lifting off of these letters here and floating out into the water. So after just kind of shuffling them all around and getting out what I could, I left them all to soak for a little bit in the water, and then I took them all out and left them to dry and just crossed my fingers that they were now saved. Once all of that was done, they mostly turned out okay. The one that got splashed first did have a lot of staining, as well as some others wherever the ink was thickest, like on the lettering. Some of the ink did bleed and stain and just would not wash out, but I was hoping at this point that once I started painting, I could kind of get this darker look to work in my favor. And then I took a trip to Walmart to grab some pens that were actually waterproof, but I got a little distracted in the toy aisle because look at these cute little cat plushies. And they also, for some reason, had this purse thing that kind of looked like a Furby, and the eyes opened by itself. Like, look at this. It's so creepy. Like, why? Who wants this? Who is this for? And I think they're actually trying to make Furbies come back, because look at these dudes. They're so scary, and for some reason their bellies light up with a heart, and like, I feel like that makes it scarier. I don't know. Let me know what you think, but I did not like these guys, so I skedaddled out of there. So I tested the new pens to double check that they were actually waterproof, and then I just went back over any of the lines that I wanted to make a little bit sharper from the bookmarks. And then I was finally ready to actually start painting. After getting some yellows down as the base coat, I started to add in some darker browns to the fence for some detail. Then for the edges of the fence, I went in with a dark gray paint to kind of define some of those lines, so it gives a little bit of a softer look than if I used my fine liner again. And one trick that I like when I'm doing something like leaves is that I'll lay down a thin layer of clear water on the watercolor paper, and then I'll go in with my paint and then do these splotches, so it kind of, once it dries, gives a blurred effect. And yes, my bookmark tried to blow away. I had my fan on, so thankfully I was able to catch it. And for the back, I did pretty much the same thing. This is where you can see a lot of that splotchy staining that I had from that pen incident earlier, but thankfully, since the background is just leaves, it kind of worked. So the splotches kind of just blended in and looked kind of natural and almost added to the effect, which was really cool. So then I just added in the details to the fence on this side, similar to how I did on the other side, and with that, this bookmark was finished, and this is how it turned out. Next, I painted the bookmark for these animal mug shots, so I wanted this bookmark to be really colorful and for each character to have their own background color. So for the main character, I started off with this light blue, and for the other characters, I just put in whatever color I thought would match them best. So to paint the fur, I started off with a lighter color just to get a clean wash of color on all of the animals' faces, and then I went back in with my details later with darker colors, and I felt like this helped to make their texture a little bit fuzzy. Then for the other side, I just repeated that same process, choosing background colors that I thought worked well together, put in the base layer for all of the animals' faces, and then added in the details, and then we were done. Next up, I painted the Mr. Gum bookmark, and I started off with the back where I just kept it really simple by doing this kind of off rainbow pattern. So if you can kind of see the book that's at the top there just off screen, a lot of the backs of the Mr. Gum books have different colored stripes, and this one in particular had tons of colors, so I kind of just wanted to replicate that over the lettering so that it was still going to be legible but also really bright and fun. And then for the other side, I pretty much just colored this in as if it was a coloring book. I just did everything the same color that it was on the reference pictures. Okay, this one was one of the only drawings that I did without a reference picture, so I kind of just left it pretty simple. I put in some details as I went along and as I thought of things, and I decided to make the background wall just this pretty purple color because that seems pretty magical to me. And I also added in these vines hanging down from the shelves to fill in some of that extra space. Okay, now came the fun part where I was cracking out my metallic paints. So these potion bottle things that I painted in aren't technically potion bottles. In the Mistborn series, there are people that have powers, and to use their powers, they have to consume different types of metals. So I thought I would paint in these metallic paints in the potion bottles to show that there's metal powders inside. And then on this other side is where I started to have some trouble. I didn't really have a clear image of what I wanted to paint, and I also wasn't really using a reference photo, so I thought if I started to lay in some colors that I would start to realize what I wanted to do and everything would start falling together, and that wasn't really the case. I wanted it to look like you were inside of a cave and that there was a path into a separate area that has this magical well inside of it, but since I didn't really plan out my sketch that well and also my watercolor skills are pretty limited, I was having trouble kind of making that idea come to life without a reference photo. So yeah, I wasn't totally happy with how this one turned out. It was probably my least favorite of the bookmarks, but I was happy to get to use my metallic paints and it ended up looking pretty cool next to the book. Okay, next up we had the surfer painting, so I kind of tried to do a general wash of different colored blues and then add in some darker colors and just try my best to make this look like a real wave. And then I pulled in my white chalk pencil to try and give some highlights to the water and make it look a little more foamy. Then for this side, I just tried my best to paint in the colors as I saw them from my reference picture. And since my reference picture didn't have anything underneath the windowsill, I just decided to mark in some lines just to make it look a little bit more interesting around those letters. And then I finished this one off with also some charcoal to add some waves into the water, and then this one was all done as well. Then last but definitely not least, I finished up with my octopus bookmark. My goal here was just to make the octopus stand out and for everything in the background to stay bright and fun. My goal was also to make sure that that one plant no longer looked like a piece of broccoli. Then I just filled in that other side, and with that, the project was finished. Here is the finished result of each and every bookmark. So here are all of my finished bookmarks. Overall, I'm pretty happy with how they turned out. It had been so long since I've painted that I wasn't really sure how it was gonna go, but there are some that I'm really happy with. I think my favorite is this octopus one, and I wasn't super happy with this guy, but to be fair, usually the bookmark that I use in my book is just the receipt from when I bought the book, so I think any of these beats an old crinkly receipt. So I'm excited to start using these as bookmarks, or more likely give them away to my family members. But thank you so much for watching my video, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!